Hi, it's Nicole. I'd like to tell you about Rawdon Crawley today, the husband of the famous Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. Rawdon didn't stand out as a promising character at the beginning. I didn't like him, as we will see in a bit, but he did become my favorite character, and my opinion of him changed dramatically. Thackeray introduces Rawdon differently to all the other main characters. We didn't hear about Rawdon's name until chapter 7, which is the third installment of the monthly serialization, which I think is quite late for a main character. We hear about his name in chapter 7, and his name keeps appearing in passing comments in relation to other people and in other people's letters. So we find out his relationship with Becky Sharp. Rawdon's dodgy baronet father, Sir Pitt, has two sons, Pitt Crawley the oldest, and then Rawdon. This baronet's wife dies and he marries a new wife. This new wife gets him two daughters, and Becky Sharp becomes these two girls' governess, and that's how they get to know each other. In Becky's letter to Amelia reporting her new home, her new situation, we learn that Rawdon is an army officer and is at the moment away with his regiment. At Eton, Pete Crawley was called Miss Crawley, and there his young brother Rawdon used to lick him violently. The elder and younger son of the house of Crawley were never at home together. They hated each other cordially. Indeed, Rawdon Crawley the dragoon had a great contempt for the establishment altogether, and seldom came thither except when his aunt paid her annual visit. The rich Miss Crawley, the baronet's half-sister, Rawdon's aunt, intends to leave him a large proportion of her inheritance, and is known to pay off his debts, and likes him so much that she practically adopts him. She also bought him his commission in the Life Guards Green, which is a fictional royal escort troop. So far we know in relation to Sir Pitt, Rawdon is the second son. In my rough knowledge of the Regency and the Victorians, the oldest son inherits the title, the land, the income, and the rest of the sons don't get much at all. And in this case, Rawdon is in the army. And we know Rawdon doesn't get on with his family very well, and in comparison to his oldest brother, Pete Crawley, Rawdon's son's a bit violent and rebellious. We know Miss Crawley is rich, and her money and favour go to Rawdon, which means even though Rawdon doesn't have a lot of income, he's liberal with his money. And it also means there are a lot of jealous people who are against him because they want a share of Miss Crawley's inheritance too. Then there's a paragraph describing Rawdon from the author, which we take as less biased and more authoritative since it's from the author himself. A perfect and celebrated blood, or dandy, about town was this young officer. Boxing, which is bare knuckles boxing if you watched Bridgerton. Rat hunting, a blood sport that involves releasing captured rats in an enclosed space with spectators betting on how long a dog takes to kill the rats. The fives court, a form of handball, and four-in-hand driving, a carriage with four horses. Boxing, rat hunting, the fives court, and four-in-hand driving were then the fashion of our British aristocracy, and he was an adept in all these noble sciences. And though he belonged to the household troops, who, as it was their duty to rally round the Prince Regent, had not shown their valour in foreign service yet, Rawdon Crawley had already, apropos of play, of which he was immoderately fond, fought 3 bloody duels, in which he gave ample proofs of his contempt for death. Rawdon's person hasn't arrived on stage until chapter 11, and even then it's through another letter from Becky to Amelia announcing Captain Crawley has arrived. I will only quote a little bit from this section so you get a feel of it. Well, he is a very large young dandy. He is 6 feet high and speaks with a great voice and swears a great deal and orders about the servants, who all adore him nevertheless, for he is very generous of his money, and the domestics will do anything for him. Last week, the keepers almost killed a bailiff and his man, who came down from London to arrest the captain, and who were found lurking about the park wall. They beat them, ducked them, meaning push or plunge someone under water, and were going to shoot them for poachers, but the baronet interfered. We see Rawdon through Becky's eyes. He's large, loud, and not very sophisticated. He's careless with money, in debt to the point of being arrested. He has a dreadful reputation among women. And Rawdon likes Becky immediately. He prefers her in conversation to other country girls, and he prefers her at dances to other young ladies with higher social status. Then we hear of a conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Bute Crawley, filling in more information for us about Rawdon. Bute Crawley is Sir Pitt Crawley's brother. As a typical second son of the gentry family, he is a clergyman. Notice again, we see Rawdon through somebody else's eyes. He's a scoundrel, he looks down on our country people, he's such an infernal character. He's a gambler, he's a drunkard, he's a profligate in every way, meaning recklessly extravagant. He shot a man in a duel, he's over head and ears in debt, and he's robbed me and mine of the best part of Miss Crawley's fortune. And as for the women, why, you heard that before me, in my own magistrate's room. In terms of Rawdon's intelligence, we hear a conversation between Rebecca and Miss Crawley. Is he very clever? Rebecca asked. Clever, my love. Not an idea in the world beyond his horses and his regiment and his hunting and his play. But he must succeed. He's so delightfully wicked. So what's our impression of Rawdon so far? Bad reputation, in debt, idle with no work and too much energy, all muscle and no brain. So we finally get to meet Rawdon at the end of chapter 11. We get to see his person with our own eyes. And this is the first conversation we hear as readers. Rawdon and Becky are walking in the dark, and Rawdon is already madly in love with her.
The stars, Miss Rebecca would say, turning her twinkling green eyes up towards them. I feel myself almost a spirit when I gaze upon them. Oh, gad. Yes, so do I exactly, Miss Sharp, the other enthusiast replied. You don't mind my cigar, do you, Miss Sharp? Miss Sharp loved the smell of a cigar out of doors beyond everything in the world. And she just tasted one, too, in the prettiest way possible, gave a little puff and a little scream and a little giggle, and restored the delicacy to the captain, who twirled his moustache and straightway puffed it into a blaze that glowed quite red in the dark plantation, and swore, Jove! Gad! It's the finest cigar I ever smoked in the world. For his intellect and conversation were alike brilliant and becoming to a heavy young dragoon.
He can't even utter a complete, intelligent sentence. He seems to be tongue-tied most of the time in front of Becky. There are a lot of dashes linking up short bursts of words. In comparison to Becky's wit and eloquence, he sounds like a big dog when they decide to try out human language. I don't have a very high opinion of him at this point, and he's captured by Becky in no time. When Rawdon makes acquaintances with George Osborne, Osborne's impression is that Rawdon is a devilish good, straightforward fellow. This is an opinion from someone who has just met Rawdon and who has no part in the family inheritance battle. So why does everybody think so negatively about Rawdon, but George thinks the opposite? You can take it as George doesn't know how to judge a person, or George thinks Rawdon's behavior and his debt just nothing because he's exactly the same. In terms of judging a person, George Osborne is generally a fool, but his verdict that Rawdon is a devilish good, straightforward fellow proves to be quite accurate. I will give you two examples to show how Rawdon surprised me, and they are big surprises. Early conversations hint that he has bad reputation among women, and I didn't think he would be a model husband, but he genuinely loves his wife and his married life. In an earlier video, I mentioned that he takes the risk and in the end loses his whole inheritance because of marrying Becky. When the same thing happens to George, George Osborne immediately regrets marrying Amelia. Rawdon never does, and simply says, I don't regret it if you don't. And the veteran rake, Rawdon Crawley, found himself converted into a very happy and submissive married man. I was still skeptical about him up to the point of the Battle of Waterloo. What Rawdon says and does before he goes on the battlefield completely changed my opinion about him. You don't suppose I'm afraid, Becky, I should think, he said with a tremor in his voice. But I'm a pretty good mark for a shot, and you see, if he brings me down, why, I leave one and perhaps two behind me whom I should wish to provide for, as I brought them into the scrape. It is no laughing matter that, Mrs. C, anyways. Look here, said he, if I drop, let us see what there is for you. I have had a pretty good run of luck here, and here's £230. I have got 10 Napoleons in my pocket. That is as much as I shall want, for the general pays everything like a prince. And if I'm hit, why, you know I cost nothing. Don't cry, little woman, I may live to vex you yet. Well, I shan't take either of my horses, but shall ride the general's grey charger. It's cheaper, and I told him mine was lame. If I'm done, those two ought to fetch you something. And so, making his last dispositions, Captain Crawley, who had seldom thought about anything about himself until the last few months of his life, when love had obtained the mastery over the dragoon, went through the various items of his little catalogue of effects, striving to see how they might be turned into money for his wife's benefit, in case any accident should befall him. He pleased himself by noting down with a pencil, in his big schoolboy handwriting, the various items of his portable property which might be sold for his widow's advantage, as, for example, my double barrel by Manton, say 40 guineas, my driving cloak, lined with sable fur, £50, my duelling pistols in rosewood case, same which I shot Captain Marker, £20, my regulation saddle holsters and housings, my lorry ditto, and so forth, over all of which articles he made Rebecca the mistress. Faithful to his plan of economy, the captain dressed himself in his oldest and shabbiest uniform and epaulets, leaving the newest behind under his wife's, or it might be his widow's, guardianship. And this famous dandy of Windsor and Hyde Park went off on his campaign with a kit as modest as that of a sergeant, and with something like a prayer on his lips for the woman he was leaving. He took her up from the ground and held her in his arms for a minute, tight pressed against his strong beating heart. His face was purple and his eyes dim as he put her down and left her. He rode by his general's side and smoked his cigar in silence as they hastened after the troops of the general's brigade, which preceded them. And it was not until they were some miles on their way that he left off twirling his moustache and broke silence. Rawdon hardly ever makes long speeches like this, and it's all about how his wife and child should be provided for if he dies on the battlefield. It's a great contrast to the Rawdon who was careless about money. He counts every penny of his earthly possession, and he leaves his uniform and his good horses behind as well. He's going to a battlefield for goodness knows how long. He might be cold, he might be wet, a good horse might save his life, but he leaves them all to Becky. Compared to Becky's fake tears and undisturbed sleep, Rawdon suddenly becomes a loyal, honest and tender husband. We learn from the beginning that Rawdon has bad relationship with his father and his brother, so maybe he won't care about family life. I'm wrong again, and it's really lovely to read about his interaction with little Roddy, his son. He's not a distant and cold father figure like a Regency or Victorian stereotype. He spends time with him, plays with him, and takes great pride in his little son. When toddler Roddy cries and Becky just ignores him and continues flirting with Lord Steyne, it's Rawdon who goes to his little room and comforts him. The colonel's dressing room was in those upper regions. He used to see the boy there in private. They had interviews together every morning when he shaved. Rawdon minor sitting on a box by his father's side and watching the operation with never-ceasing pleasure. He and the sire were great friends. The father would bring him sweetmeats from the dessert and hide them in a certain old epaulette box. where the child went to seek them and laughed with joy on discovering the treasure. Laughed, but not too loud, for Mamma was below asleep and must not be disturbed. She did not go to rest till very late and seldom rose till afternoon. Rawdon bought the boy plenty of picture books and crammed his nursery with toys. Its walls were covered with pictures, pasted up by the father's own hand and purchased by him for ready money. When he was off duty with Mrs. Rawdon in the park, he would sit up here, passing hours with the boy, who rolled on his chest, who pulled his great mustachios as if they were driving reins, and spent days with him in indefatigable gambols, meaning running or jumping about playfully. The room was a low room, and once when the child was not 5 years old, his father, who was tossing him wildly up in his arms, hit the poor little chap's skull so violently against the ceiling that he almost dropped the child, so terrified was he at the disaster. Rawdon minor had made up his face for a tremendous howl. The severity of the blow indeed authorized that indulgence, but just as he was going to begin, the father interposed. "For God's sake, Roddy, don't wake Mamma," he cried. And the child, looking in a very hard and piteous way at his father, bit his lips, clenched his hands, and didn't cry a bit. Rawdon told that story at the clubs, at the mess, to everybody in town. "By Gad, sir," he explained to the public in general, "what a good, plucked one that boy of mine is. What a trump he is. I half sent his head through the ceiling, by Gad, and he wouldn't cry for fear of disturbing his mother." Later, when things go terribly bad and his life is in danger again, he goes to see his brother and begs him to do 2 things for him. One is to pay Briggs back with the money he comes across because she's so kind to the boy, and secondly, to look after the boy when he's away, when he's absent, because the boy has no mother. Again, we see how Rawdon makes sure his son is provided for before he goes to get killed. He is a really loving father. There's a lot more I can say about Rawdon Crawley, but the episode before the Battle of Waterloo and the intimate moments between he and his son really stand out to me the most. I end up really loving Rawdon as a character, and I wish the author could treat him kinder, give him a better ending. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching. I will see you in my next one. Bye!